Since Charlie Kirk's assassination, the political temperature in America has risen markedly. Republicans and Democrats haven't been on great terms for some time now, but partisan antipathy feels like it's reached a new high, with the Trump administration promising a sweeping crackdown on the quote, radical left, and at least some Democrats accusing Trump of using Kirk's death to escalate his autocratic assault on America's institutions. Unsurprisingly, this has all exacerbated pre-existing anxieties about the health of American politics. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at America's democratic crisis by focusing specifically on the issue of losers' consent, why losers' consent has long been under strain, and why Kirk's assassination will probably make things worse. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So, let's start by explaining the idea of losers' consent. This might feel like a somewhat abstract way into the topic, but bear with us, because we think it's a good way of condensing all the chaos of American politics into a neatish framework and demonstrating why America's democratic crisis is genuinely unique. In short then, losers' consent refers to the notion that the losers at democratic elections nonetheless accept the result, without resorting to violence or secession. Losers' consent is essential for the functioning of democracy for obvious reasons, not least because without it, elections no longer guarantee real transfers of power. Anyway, losers' consent is generally taken to rely on three things. First, a common sense of nation. This might sound odd. After all, lots of people these days see democracy and nationalism as somehow in tension. But a common sense of nation provides the basic reason for us, when we're losers, to accept what other people voted for. We consider those people fellow citizens and are thus happy to, at least temporarily, subsume our individual wants to those of the nation. To motivate this idea, just imagine that, say, France and the UK became one country, as was apparently suggested by French Prime Minister Guy Mollet in 1956. Governing would be impossible because there would always be a sense that the English were imposing laws on the French, and vice versa. Similarly, this is why multinational democratic projects often struggle. Much of the resistance to a more federal European Union, for example, stems from an anxiety that some nations might be outvoted by others. It's also why Brexit put such a strain on the UK's constitutional order. While a majority of voters in England and Wales voted for Brexit, there was a sense in parts of the other nations, especially Scotland, that they shouldn't have to accept the outcome of a vote decided by another nation. It's not just nationhood though. Second, losers' consent requires on a mutual faith in the fairness of the electoral process. Losers are unlikely to consent to outcomes if they think the other side has in some sense cheated. Most of the time, this just means not breaking the law, but there might also be extra legal norms that politicians and parties are expected to follow, including, most obviously, avoiding the explicit politicization of the legal system. And thirdly, losers' consent relies on voters' confidence that there will be another election in the future. Losers won't consent if they think that their loss is final. No one wants to be a loser forever. In America today, all three of these are under pressure. First, any common sense of nation has been strained by political polarization. Of course, Democrats and Republicans have always had their disagreements, but their opinions of one another have cratered in recent years. According to Pew polling from 2022, not only are Democrats and Republicans far more likely to express very unfavorable views of the other party than they used to be, but they're also more likely to ascribe negative traits to voters on the other side. Majorities of Republicans and Democrats accuse the other side of being immoral, dishonest, unintelligent, and close-minded. And other polling by YouGov has found that both Democrats and Republicans have become increasingly likely to say that they would feel unhappy if their child married someone from the other party. Perhaps the most direct attack on this notion of a common nation has come from those Republicans who have accused Democrats of actively encouraging illegal immigration to tilt elections in their favor. In other words, that Americans are outvoted by non-Americans. Anyway, a thorough explanation of polarization in America and how its politics became so personal is beyond the scope of this video, but social media is clearly playing a central role here by magnifying extreme voices on both sides of the political aisle. This can have a radicalizing effect on your own politics, but more insidiously, it can also create misperceptions about the other side. In other words, it makes Republicans overestimate how radical Democrats are, and makes Democrats overestimate how radical Republicans are. Of course, this will all be made worse by Charlie Kirk's assassination, which has given way to a sense among at least some Republicans that the left, in their words, supports political violence and is therefore not deserving of political decency. You saw a pretty clear example of this at Kirk's memorial on Sunday, when Trump said, having blamed in his words the other side, said, quote, "I hate my opponent and I don't want the best for them." Similarly, both sides are rapidly losing both their faith in and commitment to the fairness of the electoral process. Most obviously, Trump has continued to baselessly insist that he won the 2020 election, but beneath this, interstate disagreements over voting laws, the egregious influence of money in American politics, blatant gerrymandering, and the hyper-politicization of the Supreme Court have all contributed to a sense on both sides that elections in America are no longer fair. Again, Kirk's assassination makes this worse. Trump has already used it to escalate his assault on America's media, which in turn will exacerbate the sense among Democrats that Trump is unfairly weaponizing America's institutions in his favor. Finally, at least some Democrats worry that there might not be another election after Trump, or at least not another free and fair one, and that the 2026 midterms are therefore the last chance to save America's democracy. Conversely, for Trump and some other senior Republicans, there's a non-trivial chance that they could face criminal prosecution if they lost the next election. This isn't some far-fetched hypothetical. Earlier this year, special counsel Jack Smith claimed that Trump would have already been convicted for illegally trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election had he not won in 2024. So what does this erosion of losers' consent entail for America? Well, most obviously, it increases the odds of contested elections. It also marks out America's democratic crisis as uniquely acute. After all, while the political temperature is rising across the globe, in most other democracies, losers' consent has generally held up. But more structurally, it disrupts the normal rhythm of democratic politics. Elections should provide relief. Both sides fight hard during the campaign, and then things calm down once the result has been decided. Without losers' consent, elections instead become flashpoints, and politics gets stuck in an endless, escalating cycle of partisanship. The media landscape right now is moving so fast that it's quite easy to rely on just the information you already know, or the sources you've grown to trust. But what about everything you don't see? Or what if those sources you trust aren't completely honest? Well, luckily our sponsor this week, Ground News, are experts at lifting the veil on media bias. Their website and app, developed by a former NASA engineer, collects thousands of articles from across the media landscape, putting them all into one place for you to easily compare how the news is being covered around the world. For example, this story on Kirk's assassination has been covered by 1,636 sources, with 293 reported by the left and 243 reported by the right. We can even dig deeper by looking at the political bias, factuality, and ownership of said sources. That's not all though, as Ground News offers a bunch of super handy features. We especially like their blind spot feed, as here you can see stories that have been disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum or the other. For example, if you lean left, you might have missed this story about Tucker Carlson's speech at Kirk's memorial. It's important to know exactly what's circulating online in different echo chambers, instead of purposely choosing to stay in the dark. We all know that the current media sphere is always trying to get your attention by any means necessary, to sway you into thinking one thing or another. So having a website that helps you spot when that's happening is a real game changer. So if you're interested in staying on top of the news and trying everything that Ground News has to offer, then you can get a 40% off the unlimited Vantage Plan subscription by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. This limited time offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.